each of you to introduce yourself, starting here on the, I guess, the left of the dais. Go ahead.
My morning, is my mic on? Yes, very good. Dave Zavril, representing the East Grand Forks Chamber of Commerce.
Brian Larson, representing East Grand Forks City Council.
John Zavril, representing Reinhardt Township.
Eric Hansen, representing Grand Forks 32nd Avenue neighborhood.
Zach Bope, representing Reinhardt neighborhood in East Grand Forks.
Craig Wald, represented Bigland neighborhood, East Grand Forks.
I'm Andrew Budke. I live in the near south side and the west side, Grand Forks.
Kyle Kavami, representing Grand Forks City Council.
And then online, if I call your name, would you introduce yourself, please? Wayne Zacher.
Wayne Zacher, North Dakota DOT.
Jason Peterson. I can see you, Jason, but you're on, not able to hear you. Terry Kuba.
Hi, Terry Kuba with the MPO.
And Jason, you want to try your mic again?
Yeah, Jason Peterson, North Dakota DOT Grand Forks.
Okay, great. And then also online, we have Mike Kay from Alliant.
Hi, yep, this is Mike Conziocco with Alliant Engineering.
And for those participants online, if you would raise your hand or somehow indicate that you would like to speak, please bear with us as we try to administer and present at the same time. So again, good morning. We do have an agenda. We may take the whole time or not, depending on how much interaction we have from the materials that we presented to you and the questions and the answers we can provide. The meeting is basically going to be run by Tim, and then we'll have assistance from Mike Kay online on some of the information, then be back to Tim, and then we'll close up. Are there any questions before we get started? With that, then again, introduce Tim Burkhart with Alliant Engineering. And Tim, if you can just either click on the left or scroll.
Sounds good.
Control the PowerPoint.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Earl, and thanks everyone for your time again, and definitely nice to be here in person. And I said, seeing people in 3 dimensions, it's much better than just 2, so glad to be here. And yeah, you see the agenda up there on the screen, and yeah, we'll take the time that we need, and you'll note at the end I have the check-in with the ad hoc members, which is my chance just to ask if there's any other topics or anything that's on your mind that hasn't come up, or pick on you if I have a specific question. So on my mind here is preparing for our first public open house, which will open up. It'll be an online event, but opening up next week. And between now and then, it's been a while since we met, and catching you up on the traffic and safety work that we've been preparing. You've seen the memos, but sort of running through that at a high level, which is what Mike will do. And then talk about the project purpose and need, which is probably a term you've heard before on other projects, but sort of our official documentation of why a new bridge is needed and what it is we're looking for to show that we've achieved, sort of accomplished and met the needs that we've identified. So that's it for the agenda. Any questions on that or additions that anyone would like to see? Okay, well, feel free to speak up anytime and ask questions. And let's see if I can drive this. Okay. Familiar slides here just in terms of our schedule for the consultant work goes through the end of the year. We're on schedule coming up, as I just mentioned, on our public open house at the end of this month. And then quickly getting into sort of the developing and evaluating the alternatives, which we sort of have identified those corridors from the beginning, so it'll really be putting those on paper to see what they look like, and then looking at the traffic impacts specifically if a new bridge was developed at either of those locations. And then, as you can see, wrapping up with that implementation plan, which is really sort of, okay, we've evaluated these options, and then what does it take to do them, and are there sequencing issues or other things that need to be addressed? Next steps, and then documenting that in a report by the end of the year. So we do have a total of 3 public input opportunities identified, just coming up on the first one, so the next 2 will be coming up much more quickly than so far, so hopefully within a couple months we'll be back to share those proposed alternatives with the public. Detail that I won't go into here, just the guts of what we're doing at the consultant level. You see these deliverables as they come out. So the middle ones in the middle column are ones that you have in front of you, and then upcoming will be the documentation I just talked about related to the alternatives. So now I'll turn it over to Mike Konzioka from Alliant to talk about the existing and future no-build traffic and safety. Mike?
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I will walk through the traffic analysis that we've done here. We've produced 2 technical memorandums so far, 3A being shown here, which documents methodology for developing the traffic volumes used in the analysis, and then also our forecast methodology to project future year traffic volumes as well. So that's summarized in 3A, and this also covers any type of adjustments that were made to traffic volumes to account for historical growth or adjustments due to lower traffic volumes seen during COVID-19. So if you want to move to the next slide, please, Tim. So just a high-level overview going through what's in Tech Memo 3A, the traffic volume development. We discussed our counts that were collected. We had a variety of data sources for the analysis here, some being collected by Alliant this year, and then also some data that was used in the prior river crossing alternatives analysis study from 2018 provided by the MPO. And then we collected traffic counts from an online system for some of the traffic signals in Grand Forks. And then just covering the adjustment factors that were applied to the traffic volumes to get some consistency with pre-COVID conditions and traffic volumes, and growing those traffic volumes that were from pre-2019 up to traffic volume levels from 2019 to kind of set an even baseline for the traffic analysis. And so just to note, there was a prior study that was done here for the river crossing alternatives analysis. There are a couple differences from that, being that study had some different intersections. This study does include some additional intersections. The prior study also studied just the PM peak hour, and we're also including the AM peak hour in our traffic analysis here. And then just some additional data than what was with our new volumes that were collected used in this analysis. Next slide, please. So we also developed our forecast future traffic volumes using information from ATAC, and that's using the travel demand model, as was used in the prior study as well. But this provides some forecast traffic volumes for the future analysis years, being 2030 and 2045, which we used in comparison to the existing traffic volumes to develop growth factors and grow our traffic volumes into the future for those given years. So we use this data, and then what's covered here is we're going to walk through the no build, which is without an additional bridge. But for the scenarios where there are additional bridges at either Elks Drive or at 32nd, we developed new volumes for those approaches where the bridges would go based on forecast information from travel demand modeling.
Hey, Mike, this is Eric Hansen. I've got a real quick question that I haven't seen addressed anywhere, and that's the growth factors for approaches based on ADT growth. I don't know what ADT growth means. Could you just, I'm just curious on how you get to those future numbers.
Absolutely. Yep. So this, the travel demand modeling provides information. So ADT is average daily traffic, and that is, it's a volume source that we would have for each of these individual road segments within the study area. So we have data from the travel demand model for daily traffic volumes from 2015, 2030, and 2045, and those incorporate any changes in development or housing that's anticipated into these future years. So we use those traffic volumes to compare an existing year to a future year with projected growth contained within the model. And we compare those two volume sets to develop a percentage that we then apply to the turning movement volumes that we have for each of these intersections, and use that to kind of establish our traffic volumes for each one of these study intersections. Does that help?
Yep. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that covers our forecasts here. If you want to move to the next slide, please. All right, so that kind of is this quick summary of Tech Memo 3A and the traffic volume development. So if there are any other questions on volume development, let me know. Otherwise, we can get into kind of the meat of this with the existing and future no-build operations and safety analysis. So this is Tech Memo 3B. This includes our operations and safety for the forecast years 2030 and 2045. It also includes a safety analysis looking at the past 5 years of safety data. And then our mobility and operations analysis is included in this memo as well, which covers the existing conditions and then the forecast 2030 and 2045 no-build conditions, which is, again, just the condition without an additional bridge with the existing point bridge only. And this will cover level of service, that's LOS, that's a metric that is used for traffic operations analysis to kind of simplify what the expected operations are using just a grade scale, A being the best, E and F representing overcapacity conditions. So we'll get into those in the coming slides here. If we could go to the next slide, please. So there are a couple graphics here just to show what the anticipated volume changes would be into the future forecast years. So these graphics show thicker lines where we anticipate greater traffic growth without a new bridge. So this is from 15 to 2030. And it just shows kind of the more concentrated growth locations with the thicker blue lines here. So we can see Washington Street, 32nd Avenue to the west of Washington, DeMars, and the Point Bridge are all expected to have large increases or the largest increases in traffic volumes under the scenario without an additional bridge connection here.
Mike, interrupt you for 1 second. Zach Bope here. One question. Yes. Can you remind us quick the level of service that is currently on the South End Bridge here now, where we're adding up to 3,000 more cars? It looks like based on this 2015 to 2030. What was the current level of service on that bridge?
We will cover that. There's, I think in 2 slides here, we have a graphic that'll show the existing level of service based on the existing volumes here. So that'll be, we can show that in a couple of slides here. We'll cover really the existing level of service for each of these segments here, but yep, that'll be coming up in just a slide or 2.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, if we want to go to the next slide, this will show us the 2045 changes just as a comparison to the 2030 here. This shows additional traffic growth showing up on Belmont Road and then on US 2 here. as well. So this is just growth further into the future on top of what was projected into 2030. If there's no questions on this, we can go to the next slide. So this covers the safety analysis that was conducted. So we did a safety analysis for both intersections and segments within the study area. This looked at traffic crash data from 2016 to 2020, which is the previous 5 years of available data. And this looked at a couple of different ways to look at a crash analysis. One being total crashes or just the crash rate. That's kind of the first section here. And then there's another kind of way to look at it that's really focusing on the more severe crashes and fatal crashes, which is called KA, and that is on the section to the right here. So using these kind of two different tools to look into the traffic safety, we conducted a safety analysis for each of the intersections and segments in the study area, and then also looked at any crossings, pedestrian crossings near school driveways as well. So what's shown on this slide is the results of the intersection crash analysis, and this is just the locations that we found to have significant crash issues based on the existing data. So these 4 intersections shown here at 3 on Washington, at 32nd Avenue, 24th Avenue, and Mars had total crash rate issues, and that is saying that there is a total number of crashes that is greater than what's expected for a similar roadway type. And then we also found at the intersection of Bigman Road and Greenway Boulevard that there is a KA crash, that's fatal or severe injury crash issue. And that is stemming from an incapacitating injury at that intersection within the past 5 years.
Hey, Mike, would you explain the red versus yellow coloring on the chart?
Yes, yep, thank you. The red highlighting here is indicating that we have a statistically significant crash issue, and that is indicated in the furthest right column for each of these. So the critical crash index is, if that is greater than 1.0, that's indicating a statistically significant problem. And then similarly for the fatal and severe injury crashes, the critical KA index on the farthest right column of this, if that column is greater than 1.0, that indicates statistically significant fatal and severe crash issue here. So that is the red, and then the yellow is showing a comparison between the crash rate and the state average crash rate. So if the crash rate for a given intersection exceeds the state average crash rate for a given intersection, it'll be highlighted yellow. And the differentiating factor there is that the state average crash rate is different from this critical crash rate, and that the critical crash rate takes into account the vehicle exposure or the traffic volumes for a given roadway type. So it brings another level of comparison into the crash analysis, which then allows us to indicate whether it's statistically significant for that roadway type or volume level as compared to just comparing to a statewide average crash rate. So are there any questions on the intersection analysis? And if not, we have the segment analysis next here. So the segment crash analysis is looking at the stretches of roadway between intersections, between study intersections. And this is the same type of analysis that was conducted. So we found 4 locations with critical crash index issues. That's total volume of crashes. The first being the Point Bridge between the 2 cities here, which is highlighted. Next we have on 24th Avenue between Washington and Cherry. We have on Washington between Mars and 24th, and Cherry between 4th and 24th here. So 4 locations with crash index issues, and then we have 3 locations as well that had fatal or severe injury crash index issues, and that would be 32nd Avenue between 20th Street and Washington Street, and then DeMars and 4th between Washington and Cherry, and then US 2 between 180th to Trunk Highway 220. So any questions on the safety analysis as a whole or on the segments specifically? If not, we can move to the next slide here. So moving from the safety analysis, this is now a summary of the traffic operations analysis that was completed. So this is getting back to the prior question about the existing level of service on the Point Bridge. So this looks at operations and mobility in 2 different viewpoints. One of them shown on the left here is the volume to capacity ratio, and that's looking at daily volumes in comparison to a capacity for a given roadway type. So a 2-lane road has a different capacity than, say, a 4-lane road, and this is a total in each direction. But so this is comparing the capacity for that roadway type versus the current traffic volumes on each one of those roadway segments. So that's shown on the left. This is volume to capacity. And as you get closer to capacity, that ratio of volume to capacity gets closer to 1 or exceeds 1.0, and that's indicating a situation where your roadway traffic is exceeding the capacity for that given roadway type. So these is shown in the legend here is kind of this grading scale that we have for level of service, going A, B, C, and D. Those are all from a volume capacity ratio of 0 up to 0.9, and those are considered acceptable operations. And then once you get up to level of service E, that's reaching capacity, and then level of service F is exceeding capacity. So those are shown here on the left for each of the roadway segments analyzed. And to answer the prior question, the Point Bridge is currently operating at level of service A from a daily volume perspective. That's somewhat different, and which is included over here. This is different than the peak hours. So while the daily volumes are within capacity, the intersection analysis may show mobility issues or operational challenges during the peak hours. So it's kind of looking at two different standpoints here. And so that's what's covered.
This is Eric Hansen. I've got and maybe you can get into this after you go over, some of the future stuff too. I'm just kind of curious on why, a couple like Belmont and 4th, for example, the AM peak hour is at an E, but the PM peak hour is at a C. And there's some differences in some of them, between AM and PM. Do you have any insight into why that is?
Yeah, these are all going to be kind of independent. The peak hours are going to operate kind of independent from one another based on the traffic volumes and the traffic patterns for each of those peak hours. So based on the traffic data that we have for volumes, the operations for the AM would kind of be independent if there are higher volumes or there's a higher peak hour volume specifically. Which is pretty typical for what we see in the AM, generally more concentrated volumes spiking in the AM peak hour, whereas the PM peak hour traffic volumes, in terms of patterns, would generally be a different direction, would be heavier, and then also the level of peaking that we see in the PM is generally lower or a bit more spread out than it is in the AM peak hour. But based on the 2 different volume sets that we have for turning movement volumes in the AM or versus the PM, we're going to see different traffic operations analysis results.
Okay, cool. That question just popped up, because just the colors on there, because on a previous slide, I think the PM peak volume looked higher, the bar looked higher. So I was just curious, but you know, like you said, maybe it's something that's more concentrated for the AM. That makes sense to me.
Yep, absolutely. And it can come down to individual movements that are higher or lower. There's different patterns and different conflicting volumes that may be higher in one case than a different one that would lead to worse operations in one versus another.
And Mike, this is Tim. Does it also depend on how the intersection is designed, right? Where you've got how many lanes or how much capacity in a given direction?
Absolutely, yep. So if you have higher volumes in one direction, but your intersection layout has more lanes to accommodate that, as opposed to a different direction where maybe in the PM the traffic pattern shift to be heavier in that direction, that'll completely play into the level of service that we see there as well.
Just one more question on that too. Does it, just looking at the AM peak hour being more in most of these intersections that we're calling out, does that have to do with school drop-off taking part in the AM peak hour where pickup probably isn't taking part in the PM peak hour?
That's certainly a part of it. That absolutely plays into these. It kind of depends on when your overall peak happens, and like you're saying, in the PM peak hour, that generally coincides more between like a 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock range, where it's more so the commute, the PM commute time, and generally school pickup times is going to fall before that, and so that's not traffic associated with school trips is generally not as included in the PM peak hour as it is in the AM peak hour, where those drop-off times normally coincide with the AM commute times. So that is accurate.
Yeah, it's consistent with what you said, Mike, that the AM peak hour tends to be more concentrated. So that makes sense.
Right. Yep. So just to get into the operations results for the intersection analysis shown on the table on the right here, and then just highlighted with stars in the graphic here, we see Belmont and Fourth, which is currently always stop control, so stop signs in each direction. That's operating with level of service E in the AM, so that's nearing capacity. And then also Bigland Road and Reinhardt Drive, we see is also operating at level of service E. And I'll note for these, the TWSE, that's two-way stop control or side street stop control. So Reinhardt Drive being the stopped approach at Reinhardt and Bigland. For those intersections, rather than showing an overall intersection level of service, because the approaches on Bigland Road are not stopped in any way, it's just the Reinhardt Drive approach that is stopped there. This is showing just the level of service for that worst approach, which is the stop controlled approach. So this is saying that Reinhardt Drive is operating at a level of service E here in the AM peak hour. But next, we can move to the next slide, which covers the 2030 no-build analysis. And as you can see, just comparing to the existing conditions analysis, you see more colored segments here on the left graphic. We start to see some segments that are approaching capacity, specifically Washington Street. You can see is now orange in this, which means it's into that level of service E range, which is approaching capacity of the roadway section. And then additionally, these yellow links that we're seeing, that's on Washington south of 24th between 32nd and 24th, and then also Mars and 4th between Washington and Cherry, and then also the Point Bridge here operating at level of service D. So those are increasing to a point where you would expect more congestion, more delays and backups associated with those links. And then additionally, the intersection analysis is showing some additional locations where there are some operational issues expected in the future peak hours. So in the AM peak hour, we have level of service E at Cherry and 32nd, and then at South Washington Street to Mars Street or Avenue. And then We also have some level of service F conditions, which is Belmont and 4th, and now as compared to just level service E in the 2015 existing, this is expected to operate at level service F, which is considered failing operations in both the AM and the PM peak hours, the 2030 no build. And then similarly at Reinhardt, Bigland, we see under that stop controlled scenario that the northbound approach moves from level service E to level service F in the 2030 no build. And I'll note that intersection, specifically at Bigland and Reinhardt, there's a roundabout that's part of the programmed improvements that's planned, but there's some consideration about removing that improvement. So for this analysis, we wanted to take into account both options, one being keeping that existing stop controlled at that intersection, and then also looking at what it would operate at if that improvement were to be implemented. So looking at a roundabout at that, a single lane roundabout at that intersection as well. So any questions on the 2030 no build analysis results?
Yeah, and again, I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but I noticed that the control types are static going forward in the future. I assume it's that way for the 2045. Did you do any analysis, like if the control type changed? Because I see that most of the, well, not most, some of the problems are at the all-way and two-way stops. Did you do any analysis if those were to change control type at all?
Yep, so for the no build analysis and for everything that's included in Tech Memo 3B, we only looked at changes to intersection control types that have a programmed project to implement one of those. So things that are currently planned to be constructed. So that would include this roundabout at Bigland and Reinhardt, and then we'll see in the 2045 scenario, there's also a signal that is programmed to be installed at the Bigland and Greenway intersection by 2045. So that traffic control type was included in the 2045 no build analysis. But beyond that, the no build analyses here will look at whatever the existing control type and geometry is, and then where there are identified issues coming forward in the next Tech Memo 3C, we will also explore mitigation options for those locations to see if a change in control type or a change in geometry, if warranted, would improve these future year operations. So that will be included in this next memo that's coming up.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, just if I could summarize that, Eric, and to the group, when we look at the bridge crossing options, we're also looking at what does it look like if you don't build a new bridge? What do you need at those intersections? So that's when we would get at
Okay, and that's kind of what I was getting at, you know. Okay,
you're thinking, it's good. Next slide, I think, Mike.
Yeah, we can look at the 2045 results here. So this is going to show similar incremental changes that we saw in the prior slide. So this is just growing traffic out to 2045 now and looking at operations. So as expected, further out we see additional growth, which then leads to worse operations in terms of volume to capacity and intersection operations. So things to note on the graphic on the left side, we see Washington Street here between 4th and 24th now exceeding capacity and operating at level service F by 2045. And then on DeMars and 4th there we see a couple of level service E segments as well, one particularly being on the segment on the Point Bridge. So that is expected to reach or approach capacity by that 2045 year. And then similarly, intersection operations also degrade slightly further into the 2045 no build year. So we have As compared to 2035, we have some additional level service Fs where we previously had level service E. So Cherry in 32nd, Belmont in 32nd. And then we also have Washington and Mars and Belmont in 4th. Again, still operating at in both peak hours, but just with greater delay than in 2030. And then also the stop control version of Bigland and Reinhardt into 2045, but also operate at level of service F still in the AM peak hour here. And then just the note is Bigland Road and Greenway Boulevard here. As was mentioned, this is converted to a traffic signal for this 2045 no build scenario, as that's a planned improvement by 2045. So any questions on either the 2045 operations or the operations and mobility analysis as a whole? If not, I think that was, yeah, I think that covers it.
Thanks, Mike. Earl Haugen here. I'm just going to capture a couple of things in response to some of the questions. The last meeting, we tried to prep you as to how we capture the data and travel demand modeling. And so I'll make a plug one more time that the city's land use plans are being currently updated. And if you want to make some significant change in where growth is going to occur, participating in that land use planning process is the avenue to do that. Again, land use drives transportation, transportation drives land use. And so they're connected. And so the travel demand models we're showing you is where both cities had indicated this is where we plan on growing, this is the type of growth we plan on growing there, and our models are reflecting the traffic changes that are occurring there. And so when you look at this graphic, you see that Washington, it's kind of got a problem today. It doesn't get better. There's just limited right-of-way in Washington. We can't build ourselves out. And so we can't show that we're adding additional through lanes. We can't really show we're adding additional turn lanes. We have too much access points that cause conflict, misaligned intersections that cause continued conflict. So because of Washington, we can't really show significant improvement, but we still have that. If you remember those OD maps that we showed last month, there's still a lot of draw between people traveling both sides of the river, and on the south side, it's a lot of south to south on each side of the river. And it's not just one side coming over for the morning and going back in the afternoon. So as Washington gets to be where it just can't accommodate traffic, they're finding that alternative route. And that's what this was displaying. And that's why Belmont is currently sort of the attractive alternative route for a lot of people to use. And it just gets more attractive as we go into the future because we can't build Washington Street out to accommodate that traffic volume. And it still wants to flow. It's just finding that route to flow. And similarly, that's kind of why now Cherry starts to show as having some problems. Some of the intersections along the corridor, Belmont starts to get full. And so they find the next path over, and that's Cherry Street for the most part. So again, a plug for the land use planning. Take part in that efforts.
How long is that open again, Earl? The comments, the part that's open for comments?
Right now on the Grand Forks side, there's an online mapping tool that's open for a couple more weeks.
Okay.
The actual plan will wrap up first quarter of next year, so there's still 6 to 10 months of work. Prior to it being adopted officially by the city, it'll have preliminary approval and final approval, public hearings at the planning and zoning level, and also at the city council level. So that'll occur on East Grand Forks. They started earlier. They'll wrap up at the end of this year. And again, there will be public hearing possibilities at their planning and zoning commission and at their council meeting. And one of the other uniqueness of our quarters, of a study area, just to get back to those differences between AMP and PM peaks, is this is a lot of residential neighborhoods on both sides of the river. And that's another unique characteristic of the AM and PM peak. If we're on the commercial corridors, you would probably see the stronger PM peak show up, or principal arterials would show up more in the PM. And then to explain what's happening here at Reinhardt and Bigland Road, in our current Metropolitan Transportation Plan that goes out to 2045, we prioritized a roundabout improvement at that intersection because of the traffic issues that were existing and we're showing will continue to exist in the future. So that's in the long range, 20 plus years. And then every year we adopt a short range called a TIP, Transportation Improvement Program. And in that TIP document, we say, okay, we're going to prioritize projects to receive federal funds in these next 4 years. And that's where that roundabout is showing up right now in next year's federal funding cycle. The city of East Grand Forks has asked the MPO to consider deprioritizing that roundabout and shifting the federal funds to another project. Tomorrow at noon, the MPO board is considering that request, and they have the option of saying, yes, we'll move forward and engage the public on amending all of our documents to reflect this change, or they'll say, no, we still prioritize the roundabout and send it back to East Grand Forks and say, we have to work further on this. So that's why in this study, we're showing, at least at that one intersection, kind of those two separate analyses taking place. For the rest of the system, again, back in our transportation plan, we couldn't build out Washington, so we couldn't show how we would have improvements on Washington Street. You heard me talk about the downtown decisions that we weren't going to add capacity on Demers Avenue when we rebuilt Demers, but you also heard me say that we could do adaptive traffic signal control. Right now, most of the signals in Grand Forks are on coordinated systems. However, those are just static time of day ones. And as you saw in the information last meeting, that each day we have uniqueness in our traffic flow. And so those static plans are only good maybe on a broken clock's always right twice. So adaptive signal control is on the fly, adjusting to the traffic volume that's been experienced. Now for adaptive traffic control system to go from a downtown setting where it's compact, block by block, we have signals, we have movements into a corridor like Washington, which is several miles, is more of a challenge for it to work as well. So again, we don't have a real good solution to the Washington capacity issue. And so that's why we don't have a lot of improvements showing up that would affect some of these analyses of level of service. And then I guess the third point is because everything's so tightly fiscally controlled, that we have to show that if we say we're going to improve X, we have to show that here's the funding source that can be reasonably expected to pay for it. And we just don't have the financial resources to build everything that we identify was needed. And so that's why we prioritize other improvements than what's going on around in this area. And with the hope that perhaps this study will help us identify whether we should go with a no build and then build out all of these improvements and their costs, or try to see what a bridge provides and focus our improvements just on those necessary corridors and not through this whole study area. And that's where the next meeting you'll get that sort of, if we do nothing, this is all the things we need to do based on the information you saw today. Plus you'll get, if we do this, we are able not to do these things, but we have to do this. And so we'll start getting into that comparison. So I just wanted to sort of augment the information that Alliant has presented to you and a little more background on some of the things that are going on.
Earl, that was really helpful. I think that really, for me at least, that really helped kind of tie together, all these different plans coming in that I've seen, and I've taken a look at those documents for the MPO planning and stuff like that. So thank you for that explanation. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Earl. It's really some good context, and both for the region and for this study. And it cues us up well to turn to the next section on the purpose and need, coming back to this study and bridge needs and sort of what we're doing with this information. So this term, again, purpose and need, you may have heard before. It may mean nothing to you, so I do like to explain it because it comes from the National Environmental Policy Act and the environmental studies that we have to do for transportation projects. So purpose and need explains why an agency, in this case the MPO, is undertaking the project or the study, describes the main objectives of that. So two things: need, this is kind of what you think, those are the problems that we're trying to address, and the purpose is that broader statement of the results that we expect. And then together, as you'll see, or as you know, it sort of provides, we write a document, it documents what the problems are, and then we also use that essentially to evaluate the alternatives. Are we meeting those needs with the options that we've identified? So you've seen the memo version of this, the short version here, I'll just go over again today. We've written a draft purpose statement with some bolded sections to really kind of draw out what those issues are. I'll just read it out loud. The purpose of the East Grand Forks Future Bridge Project is to improve mobility and connectivity between Grand Forks and East Grand Forks by reducing congestion on the Point Bridge and connecting roadways, while providing a more direct connection for trips between the two cities. So trying to really focus on just the thing we're trying to do, not the whole world, but what are we trying to do with this project. So that purpose statement is supported by the needs. And as you've seen, we can think about it as primary needs and secondary needs. Primary needs are really the ones, this is why we're doing the project. This is what we think the problem is that we want to fix. There's always other things that come up at the same time, maybe less important, maybe not directly related, but gee, we're doing a project, what else makes sense to do at the same time? So primary needs, the transportation problems which led to initiation of the project. Secondary needs, transportation problems or opportunities for improvements in that same area that can be done at the same time. So the primary needs that we have identified, there are two of them. It won't be surprises. It's what we've been talking about. All that technical work kind of leads us to be able to summarize and document. So congestion on or near the Point Bridge. These statements about what we're looking for, sort of that evaluation when we do the work in the next couple months, we're looking for, does a new bridge reduce congestion on the bridge and selected roadways? Again, back to those maps we just saw how would a new bridge address those issues? The second primary need, I'm looking for a simpler way to say this, but for now it says multimodal system linkage. Two things in there, really the obvious, all the bridges are at the north. We've got people traveling, throughout both cities, across the river, and there's an indirectness to those travel patterns. It's pretty obvious. The multimodal part is just acknowledging that while vehicles are the most common trip across the river, we also have the same issue for bicycles and pedestrians. There is one bridge to the south, as you know, sort of across from 17th on the west side here. Any new bridge would also include bicycle and pedestrian facilities and provide that benefit for a crossing to the south. So those really are the two primary needs as we've identified them. Again, this is called draft, looking for your input, looking for public input, either questions or clarifications as we go forward. The secondary needs that we've identified, the first one goes back to the safety and the crash information that Mike presented. Safety issues are not the driving issue for the project. However, crashes can be related to traffic volumes and other roadway needs. So what we'd be looking for is, as we propose improvements, are we reducing the crash potential on those same roadway segments and intersections? And we sort of had this sub-theme of traffic around schools. That's sort of its own issue, but there's an overlap with the bridge, as in if we're seeing unreasonable levels of traffic due to the outer direction travel from the existing condition, or if we're seeing add a new linkage across the river that brings more traffic in some locations, less in others. It's an important part of that evaluation. It's indirect in that sort of the crashes related to roadway volumes or related to what treatments we might propose at an intersection. The other secondary need is more broad and can capture a number of issues, sort of social and economic factors. The two things that we pointed out here, I guess the first one is really what I just said, sort of combined with crashes, but traffic can be a safety issue, it can also be a quality of life issue, and it's a planning issue if we have high traffic in areas that we don't plan for it, that we don't intend for it. Obviously, Washington Street has a lot of traffic. That's the type of facility, you know, as we look at those level of service indicators. A residential street that is getting a bunch of cut-through traffic that's inappropriate, that's the type of thing we're looking for. So quality of life related to disproportionately high traffic volumes. The other bullet here sort of ties in back to some of Earl's comments about transportation and land use planning. It's sort of it's understood and documented in those plans that sort of what the growth, I guess, plans are for both sides of the river, and so a new river crossing, you know, would support those plans. The other slide I have here, which kind of follows from those needs, is, well, evaluation factors. What do we do with that information? And I sort of built some of those into the needs. How are we going to decide if our alternatives are, how they're addressing those needs? So when we get to this evaluation, we'll be looking for, call it advantages or disadvantages of any of the options. Traffic performance, crash reduction, things that I mentioned. Environmental impact is built into our evaluation. Again, that's not driving the study, but we will be looking for, are there, at this high level that we're at right now, are there environmental impacts that differentiate 32nd Avenue from Elks Drive location, or that differentiate those two from doing nothing, some sort of fatal flaw or major impact. We're not doing detailed environmental studies, but we're doing sort of a scan to see, do those change our understanding of the different corridors. That's social and economic factors. There's other issues as well that we identified in our very first review of sort of the community. It might be schools, it might be low-income environmental justice populations. So again, we'll be including those in our evaluation of the corridors. Cost is an issue. Costs have been estimated in the previous study. We're not bringing in new information on cost for the crossings themselves. As we look at other treatments that might be needed at intersections, we will be doing high-level cost estimates, so you can sort of get a package of, if we do nothing, if we did 32nd, if we did Elks Drive, what does that look like in terms of keeping the system whole and making the system work. Then I kept in an other with a question mark. This is always a process of discovery as we go along. These are pretty broad categories, so they probably capture things, but there may be something else that emerges as a critical issue that gets more discussion going forward than it has so far.
I had a question on your study. Does it involve like emergency response during a flood event or when the bridges are closed or from the south end?
Well, that's a great question, and that was on my mind earlier. It's not built in right now. It's obviously sort of tucks under traffic, but I guess I might even put that question back to fill in some of the gaps in our knowledge as you look at sort of where the emergency vehicles are trying to get to and from. Certainly a new crossing, as it's sort of assumption going into the study is that would be that medium height crossing. So sort of approximately 100-year flood, I believe. I'll look for Earl to
Right.
clarify that.
It probably wouldn't say 100-year flood, but it would have the same susceptibility to flooding as the Sorley Bridge has. It's not meant to be something that's going to remain high and dry. Now, there is, in the hydraulic study, that option was spelled out and the cost associated with it, but for this study's purpose, we went with that median height. And that's just because most years, that means it is operational 365 days of the year. On those worst years, then it might be up to a week, which we seemed to have a reasonableness of the height.
The city's never been open over less than a week. It's been 2 to 3 weeks in my studies.
Sure.
You know, it never has been a week.
We have the data to show how often, how long the road, each individual bridge was closed. And it has changed through the years because communities have done something to the approaches to allow them to remain open a little bit longer. So it's not been a consistent since the flood protection system was built and finished. It has changed each flood event. And I guess while it's on my mind, the hydraulic study did eliminate, a couple of options that we're not studying anymore, 47th Avenue being the primary one. And so if you could help us get that word out, that, the hydraulic study is the study that really told us 47th is not an option to pursue. And that's why we're not pursuing it. And so if people keep coming to you as representatives of your area or your agency, why aren't they studying 47th? Refer them back to the hydraulic study and that it's just not an option.
All right, thank you, Earl. John, does that clarify?
Doesn't solve my...
Does not satisfy, but that
Not
clarifies.
if it's your death.
I mean, I think the name of this study is traffic study, and really that's the main idea is looking at the traffic issues. And I think if I could hopefully get it right in terms of what was in that prior study, the footprint and the cost of that high bridge, that high and dry bridge was really significant in terms of sort of impacts in either the communities and the cost that it would take, which maybe you're familiar with. So that's not that that's not a valid conversation, but it's definitely different.
The scenario is if a train's going through, they can't use that underpass. They can't use Demers, from the south end, and the Point Bridge shuts down before the Sorley. So there's an issue there, but I mean, I just thought it might be a selling point for Bridge South, even if it isn't the 100-year flood or still an issue.
Okay, well, keep that alive to make sure we're not missing anything in that evaluation that could impact that. That is a good question. You kind of beat me to any other questions on the purpose and need or evaluation factors? Okay, let's move on to the public open house, which I described briefly. And before we get there, as you know, we have had a project website up since April for the study, and a few statistics here. It's getting plenty of traffic, which is great. You see the total site visits, and then the unique users. So some of us, including our team, and some of you are returning multiple times. But it is getting a lot of use. We have an option for people to sign up for emails. We've had a few of those. We have posted a lot of documents on there, both our work and then previous work, and those are getting used. And then this bottom bullet, this meeting of the ad hoc group in the past has had a lot of views of that recorded information. And I assume this one will too, either live or views of the recording. So people are interested. You probably know that already. I'm looking forward to getting input at the public open house. So let me transition to that. So purpose of this first open house, sort of catch people up on why we're doing the study, basic background and goals, and then get input on the purpose and need and sort of the priorities. A lot of the open house is sharing all the information that we just have gone through in this meeting and the previous one. And the next open house will be asking people, hey, what do you think about these crossing options, both to understand concerns, preferences, priorities, any adjustments that we could make to them. So that's probably the most exciting part for a lot of people. But this one has really helped us get a baseline, sort of get information out, try to develop some more deeper understanding from people who are interested as to what the issues are and how we're trying to solve them. And then get input, both, gee, have we described, the purpose and need well? Is there an issue that's missing? And then, as I said, understand people's priorities. So we'll be doing this through the website and through presentation. So logistics, we will have an online comment period that'll be 3 weeks starting next Monday. And that'll have all the information I just shared. We're building that right now and making it user-friendly so people can scroll through quickly and jump from topic to topic and then get to the survey and give us their information. We'll also have a live online presentation next Tuesday evening. And that'll be me and our team, along with Earl, presenting a version of the information that you've all just seen, and then facilitating discussion via chat with those who participate via the Zoom meeting link. So I'm looking forward to that and have a chance to interact with people that join that link. It'll be via chat, assuming we have more than a handful of people, not really possible to facilitate live sort of in-person discussion or sort of verbal discussion, but we will gather those questions and then do our best to answer them during the time. That recording will be available afterwards during that comment period. Well, it'll be available forever, but while we have the comment site up, people can review the video, review the PowerPoint, and then provide us with their comments.
Are you planning on having any live in-person for any of the public comment?
We're not for this meeting.
This one, correct. I'm
yeah, in the future, I guess we haven't determined that yet.
I would think that you would need to, personal opinion.
Yeah, I think that's what I intended. Obviously, we've been sort of navigating through COVID.
Absolutely.
Want to do whatever works for people, and if we do it live, want to make sure people will attend. But I think more and more we're seeing, I'm sure you're seeing too, we're doing both. People are used to online, and online works for a lot of people, and then some people are ready to come out in person. The last slide I think I have here, just in terms of how we're getting the word out, official public notice coming soon from the MPO. Project email lists and other email lists that the MPO maintains. This will be put out on Facebook. And then the last bullet is where all of you come in. Make sure to share this with the group that you're representing or others, and either in person, or if you have email lists or social media, please make use of that and help get the word out. Again, part of the reason for this group is sort of, we know we can't get to every individual, and no matter how much we try to get the word out, people, some people don't, still don't see and say, hey, I wasn't there, I didn't know about it. So that's not all on you, but part of what you can help with is to get that word out and get people to the website and to the live presentation. Yeah, any other questions or comments on that open house? Okay, well, thank you for your time so far. We've got about 20 minutes till 11. I do want to finish up by then, but I would love to take a little time and go around, as I mentioned, to each of you and ask for any additional comments or questions just to make sure I'm capturing everything. And I'll just start in the room and go from left to right, my left that is, and that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I just want to echo the comments. I do think that it would be great.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Kyle Kavami with the Grand Forks City Council. Echo the comments about holding in-person or hybrid town halls, listening sessions. I think that I've had a few people that have approached me that are more curious about this information, and I am curious to see what else we can do to share, whether it's, can we coordinate with the chamber and get on their email that goes out to everybody in the city every Friday? Is there some more ways that we can get the information out? I do think that there's a lot of people that are interested in this, but have no idea it's going on. So I think that's my only concern. I think this is specifically the wrap up, Earl, and you guys did this last, 20 minutes where you kind of brought it all together. I really appreciated that summary. But let's just get that information out, and I'd be happy to chat with Earl after the fact and brainstorm more ways to share that, because I think there's just a lot of people that are interested that have no idea what's going on.
Appreciate that, yeah.
Andrew Budke, I'll just echo that. I think you're right on. I guess I don't have any other comments about what we've talked about today.
Craig Wald, I think you guys have done a really good job laying out the existing conditions, some of the no-build alternatives, and that what that brings forward. I'm really looking forward to the future analysis more so, and really seeing what the numbers come in and what those scenarios look like. So I know those are upcoming in future meetings, but I'm looking excited for that.
Zach Bope, Reinhardt neighborhood. One thing I was going to check in on too, you mentioned cost analysis would be part of the future. As part of the no-build option, and you guys mentioned that if the project's not more or less earmarked for a future project, how are the cost basis from a no-build versus these bridge options going to be comparable and whatnot? Just kind of looking for more information on how the cost estimates are going to be prepared and whatnot. So.
I can answer that briefly if I understand your question, or if not, ask again. But for the bridge crossings itself, in the study from last year, they did bridge cost estimates, right? In a future year, which I'm not, at least I assume it was the future year. If not, we can grow that out to the future. So what we will do is look at intersection treatments that would go along to support that whole system.
Okay, just those key intersections. I guess the hard part, like you mentioned, like North Washington or South Washington Street, you can't really, there's no real improvements that you can really do. Like you mentioned, it's built out to what the capacity allows. So, if we're just looking at this pot, this how many, the bridge option here costs this many $1 million, this costs this $1 million. Well, obviously the no build is going to be significantly less, most likely, but you're, kind of show the key levels of service and what your limitations are, I guess, to try to make sure when we're presenting it to our neighborhoods and different people around the community, showing that it's not apple to apple, I guess, comparisons that we're making as well,
To jump on that, is there a cost of the increased road use? So if we do nothing, is there a maintenance cost that now we're going to have to spend a little bit more? Surely I don't know how we would go about that, but I agree. I think that the do nothing, we do need a proper cost for that.
Yeah, I'll continue to think about those. I think I said intersections, really, I guess I should have said mitigation. If there's other mitigation options beyond intersections, they would be included. But yeah, as Earl pointed out, and that's not like everything's on the table. But and I think the road usage probably is a cost you could calculate, sort of increment on pavement. I'm not sure we would go there, but I guess, cost will be one factor. The other evaluation factors will also be in there to try to capture the road is congested and we've done all we can do about it. So there's some subtleties there, some cost versus the other factors is something we want to clarify. I often like to do, well, they come together. I guess it's complicated, but you already knew that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Eric?
Eric Hansen. I think you guys did a really good job today, kind of tying some of our previous discussions together and kind of painting a better big picture. Thanks for that. That was really good. Just kind of echoing Kyle's comments too about public input. if we're going to do public input, it needs to be public. And I feel very strongly about that. So, you know, I think having a strictly online meeting, I understand we're probably a little late in the game to change that horse midstream, but I don't think that that's good enough. I think we need more than that. So maybe for setting the ground level, you know, kind of producing, you know, kind of going over some of the background information that you've done for us for the first one. Maybe just an online option is okay, but I think in the future for additional public meetings, I think a couple of them have to be a hybrid at least. Just my input.
Yeah.
John Zavral, I know this is probably throwing it out there in left field, but would there ever be a study if South Washington had to be redone, what the traffic would be able to do or how you would handle it? Because you're just band-aiding South Washington right now, and if that was ever taken on production for a summer, I know it's only a summer, but can you imagine the impact it would have on the rest of the roads? And if you had a south bridge, that would eliminate a lot of that traffic that you're trying to eliminate too.
Yeah, I'll provide with you the Washington Street corridor study that we did that showed what we could do with the right-of-way that we have there. So there was a study that was done. It looked at the underpass. Next year, you'll see the underpass reconstructed. Again, there won't be expansion to meet the capacity needs, but we will have a safer crossing underpass. But I will share with that study that we did to give you some of that answer.
On that study, I guess, did it have the, I don't know if it's an option or alternative where you looked at if it's under construction, where that traffic flow went on Washington, from Washington Street, if it's under construction or not accessible, you know, say future concerns on Washington or maintenance, you know, how is that traffic flow being pushed? Was that an alternate on that study?
That typically isn't done at that planning level.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Brian Larson, East Side City Council. Thanks for the presentation here. All the documents really made it nice and clear that you know, we have current and future compounding issues with the no-build option related to traffic volume and safety. You know, the no-build option, we continue to increase our number of failing intersections right in front of schools, which I think is a major concern. And another economic impact of this no-build option is as traffic gets worse and worse here in Greater Grand Forks, we're going to reduce the number of guests that come into town to shop, to attend events. We'll start to get a reputation of a difficult town to travel through, as well as an increase of crashes, EMS costs, loss of life, et cetera. So there's a lot of other factors that I think could be put into a dollar amount, or at least a number of crashes, impacts to local families that should certainly be considered when we're showing the no-build option versus the one of the two bridge options. So I think there's a lot to wrap in there other than just a pure dollar amount. But overall, great job in the presentation. This is really easy to digest, and looking forward to the next meeting.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you. Yes,
Name?
Dave Zavro. And I would say, from a chamber's perspective, now is our opportunity. Both states, the federal government, we all have opportunities for infrastructure. Money's available. This survey, I think, shows that no build option should be no option for us. But exciting to see what the next presentation will be. So thanks for your time, guys.
On that note about the infrastructure bills that you hear about at the federal level, we did talk about earmarks at your last meeting. The House chamber did pass their version of reauthorization of transportation. There are earmarks contained within that document. Neither one of our House representatives did identify any specific projects for earmarks, so there aren't any earmarks for any infrastructure in Grand Forks, East Grand Forks on the House side. On the Senate side, there's a lot of different versions taking place. The Senate committee, that's, I guess, one of the problems on the Senate side is that several different committees control parts of reauthorization of transportation. To date, neither one of those committees have asked for earmarks to be submitted for the reauthorization process. There's the separate appropriations process. The ranking, or the main committee for transportation in the Senate side did ask for projects. Again, on the North Dakota side, there were none submitted. On the Minnesota side, the ones that were submitted weren't in the Grand Forks, East Grand Forks area. But those aren't official because the Senate chamber has not passed anything. And if you keep up with any of the national news, there's all sorts of gamemanship taking place about infrastructure right now. Just to loop back to that earmark piece.
Hey, Earl, I've got a real quick question about, maybe some on the political side of that. Does the MPO get involved with reaching out to our representatives and stuff like that for future earmarks? Now that we've done this for a cycle, maybe the next cycle we can get our act together a little bit and put something on the table for that. Does the MPO get involved in that?
Can't be directly involved with lobbying our congressmen because we are principally federally financed. Having said that, we certainly entertain questions from our congressional delegation that we can answer, and so that's sort of the back way that we do have communications with them. But the primary touch points are both cities, both counties. Yep.
Okay.
To touch on this, the city did provide what we were, what we ranked our top 5 things for earmark, but nothing was submitted. Yeah. So we tried.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's in terms of asking the ad hoc group for input. I think I got everybody. I'm just going to turn and ask if any of the online participants wanted to make a comment or ask a question at this time before we close. I think we're good then. That's it for me, and I guess turn it over back to Earl if you've got any closing comments. Thank you all, and I'll see you next time, and hopefully at the public open house.
No, the only thing would be is I'll share with you that Washington corridor study. Again, the land use plans, promote those. And if you're on the Minnesota side particularly, if we go through the amendment process for the Reinhardt-Bigland intersection and participate in that process as well. Just to backtrack a little bit, we're using that opportunity when East Grand Forks presented us that request to change our transportation plan to also ask if any of our other agencies had any changes they wanted. So we are actually going to have changes on the North Dakota side and the Minnesota side. And tomorrow we'll have a decision as to which of those amendments we'll move forward with. If not all of them, which ones we won't. So there will be amendments on both North Dakota and the Minnesota side, but the one that's more pertinent for our study is that Reinhardt-Bigland intersection one. With that, thank you for your time this morning. Hope for more rain.